All right, CNT120, Chap4Lab. We're on part 2, where we're going to look at our ARP traffic. Hopefully we remember with ARP, ARP is there to help us get the MAC address when we know the IP. Hopefully we remember we need both the IP and MAC address of a node to be able to get traffic to it. The IP address will be there and be used by routers to route the traffic to the correct network. Once it's at the correct network, something like switches are going to use the MAC address to get it to the correct node. This computer here as opposed to that printer or that IP phone. So, when I do something like DNS, I plug a name in, DNS will give me the IP address. So now I have the IP. Once I have the IP, if I don't have that MAC address anywhere on an IP4 network, ARP gets basically kicked in to help us find the MAC address of that node. And it'll broadcast out, and hopefully that node is if that node is local, it will respond with the MAC address. If that node is not local, the router or the gateway on that network usually responds and says, hey, use my MAC address if you will, and it will forward that on or get that traffic over to that network. Mr. Brown had a little trouble with some words there earlier. So we want to look at that traffic in our network. So first off, let's edit our sniffer so that we're going to see ARP and DHCP traffic. So I'm going to open my sniffer, and last we had ICMP traffic. Yours might have some packets here. I cleared mine earlier, so I'm not seeing any of the ICMP traffic, but if you do, that's not a big deal. You can clear that out. Then we'll edit our filters, and I'm going to change it to ARP and DHCP, and I'll get rid of the ICMP down here. So ARP and DHCP, when I close that, I'll see those two there. Good, good, good. Now what I'm going to do is on my Philadelphia laptop here, we'll open this guy up, and if we look at the IP settings, it's set for DHCP, and we have an address like 130.176. We want to go to the command prompt, and let's release the current IP address that we do have, ipconfig/release, and let's do ipconfig/renew. And that'll generate some DHCP traffic, which in turn will also generate some ARP traffic that we can take a look at. So that should have been enough to generate the traffic for the sniffer. I'll open the sniffer, and there we go. We have some ARP and we have some DHCP. Nice. So let's take a look at some of these first ARP packets. Let's highlight, in our sniffer, let's highlight one of the first ARP packets that we see and take a peek. We'll open the packet over here so we can see a little bit better. If we look at the Ethernet header, there's your preamble starter frame denoter. If you look at the MAC address, the destination address, that MAC address, FFFFFF, that is a broadcast layer 2 address. That is a broadcast address. This ARP is getting broadcast out to everybody, and hopefully they will respond. If I look at the ARP header now, the source MAC address and the source IP are coming from a node. I believe that might be our laptop in the network. When they broadcast out, they don't know the target MAC address, so they're basically fill this in with all zeros is almost like a blank. Like, hey, I'm looking for the MAC address. Okay, so it should hopefully be responding with that information then. And that's what we see there, almost like all zeros, if you will. So let's gather. We want to actually gather the target MAC address in our header field where we see that. We see that target MAC address like that. It's almost like a blank of like, hey, fill this in for me. So we're going to right click on that guy, and I will copy it. I will go to my text file, and I will put in here a part 2, and I'm going to put a note that this is ARP, and I'm going to paste that in. That's my target MAC for my ARP packet. Well, the other thing we want to look at while we're here, there's our ARP traffic, like, hey, can you somebody help me out, broadcast it out, and somebody fill this in for me? The other thing we want to look at here is the actual ARP table. So on a computer, once it knows an IP to MAC address mapping, it tries to save that in a table so it does not have to ask for that again. So we're going to, let's open up our Philadelphia PC now, and we're going to go to the command prompt here, and I'm going to do ARP, ARP-A, and I don't have any entries. That's okay. We haven't generated much traffic with this guy. So let's, we're going to do a couple pings here. We're going to ping We're going to ping the DNS server, the DHCP server, and the HTTP server and generate some traffic that ARP will have kicked in and built a MAC to IP address mapping and keep it in its table. So let's ping 192.168.30.2. That's the DNS server. Then we'll do 30.3. That's the DHCP server. Then we'll do 30.4. That is our web server, and I'll even do 30.1, which is the router, the actual gateway itself. So we're getting responses from all of those. Yay! So now if I do an ARP-A, I'll have a couple entries because it has now learned this IP address has this MAC address associated, this IP address, this MAC address. So if I now try to communicate with one of those, we won't need to generate ARP traffic because we have that information. We have that IP to MAC address mapping. That is our ARP table. Now, this does time out after a while. As you see, it's dynamic. This does time out, so occasionally your device will need to ARP and maybe put an entry back in that has timed out. So let's now take that, and we're going to save that to our text file that we looked at our ARP table. And this is something that all of our devices would have running, or all these devices running on our network would have. So I'll come over to my text file here, and this will be my ARP table. So if I want to, I can put here a note that this is my ARP header fields, if you will, that we looked at, and this is my ARP table if you want to kind of keep things sorted for yourself. There we go, and I will save that traffic. I'm just going to close this, and then I'll come over here and I'll save this too. That way I'm saving my progress. So there is our part 2 with ARP. We'll come back in the next part and we're going to look at UDP.